Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
For anyone who doesn't know me, my name is Reverend Ann Hines, and if you do know me, you've heard me say before that I have the best job in the world because I get to be the minister here at Roncesvalles United Church. One of the reasons it's the best job in the world is that we have so many people in this church that are so passionate about amazing things. Things that change the world, things that open our minds and our hearts, things that help us see ourselves and others in a different way. One of those groups is the Kinship Circle. Put your hand up if you're a member of the Kinship Circle. They're the ones who are presenting or providing this presentation today. But I also, before I give you the announcements for the week, want to thank all of you. When you support Roncesvalles United Church, we get to give money to the Kinship Circle. When the Kinship Circle gets money, they get to do amazing things, like bring in an author that we have been waiting to hear from and meet for 2 years. We're so glad to have her here this morning. So the announcements I want to share with you are, if you have a lawn, we have lawn signs for the RUC fleet. If you have a friend with a lawn, we have lawn signs. A lawn sign makes a beautiful hostess gift if you're going to see someone with a lawn. Okay? We have lawn signs for the RUC fleet, which is happening in a couple weeks. Ask me after church, and I'm happy to provide you with one. They are attractive. People will thank you for giving them one. Next week, Sunday, June 8th, is, anyone know? Pride Party! Right, Pride Party. So, Baby Bell Bell, who was here 2 years ago, is our drag queen feature this year. There will be singing, there will be dancing, there will be crafts, there will be cookie decorating. There will be a lot of stuff that doesn't necessarily look like church unless you're at Roncesvalles United Church. So, bring anybody you can think of because it is so much fun, all right? So much fun. That's June 8th. On June 21st, which is a Saturday, Philip Coche will be unveiling his new work of art for our space. Philip has taken, as you may know, the back off of one of our old pews, so a century-old pew, and he has carved medicine wheel symbols on it. It is going to be mounted inside the church, right on this pillar here. It's going to be a magnificent addition to our sanctuary. So on June 21st, between 4 and 6, Philip will be here. He'll unveil his artwork. We have light refreshments provided by an Indigenous caterer. It's all sponsored by the BIA, and that's how we are celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, June 21st. June 22nd, oh my God, I could go on forever right here. June 22nd is our celebration of the 100th year of the United Church of Canada, and we have bumped the Light of the World dedication to June 29th. If you're going, I can't keep all this in my head, you don't have to. Max sends out a wonderful e-news every week. You can look on our Instagram, you can look on our Facebook, you can ask me after church anytime. You don't want to miss out on anything that's happening in June. That's all I have to say, except for one more time saying thank you to the Kinship Circle for providing us with this wonderful opportunity today. We are so grateful. Thank you.
So I'm Nancy. Okay, people hear me? Yeah, okay. So I'm Nancy Clear, and I'm going to do the land acknowledgement. Our church does not do land acknowledgements every Sunday. And there's been a lot of discussion around that in our group. But we decided for this service that we really wanted to do land acknowledgement because, in fact, we were really inspired by Patti's book to do one, and to really dig into it. So I spent quite a bit of time writing this up, and it's a tall order to prepare a meaningful land acknowledgement. And I'm only going to scratch the surface because the history of Indigenous peoples here goes far back, and it is very, very rich. So here's what I came up with. Many Indigenous peoples have lived on the lands of and waters of what is now southern Ontario, and they still live here today. I'm going to start with more recent history, and we know that the Wendat, which are also known as the Hurons, and the Iroquois were at war with each other in this area, before the 1700s. And the Wendats got pushed out. The Wendats, by the way, are the ones who have the very famous Christmas carol, the quotes Huron Christmas carol that has been rewritten, that we've heard about. The Wendots were pushed out into what is now Quebec, and the Iroquois were later pushed out by some of the Ojibwe or Anishinaabe people who came from the north around Lake Superior. The British called them, this group of people, the Mississaugas. The history of the interactions between the English settlers and the Mississaugas in this area is long. I'm not going to go into it, but it's reflected pretty well, I think, in a quote from a very Indigenous, important historian of the Mississaugas, the famous Methodist minister, and our church is very much tied up, the United Church is very tied up with this story because Peter Jones was very much part of the Christianizing of this area. He, in Anishinaabe, Moan, his language, or his name is Kakawakwanabe, or Sacred Feathers. He's very much a part of the history of the United Church. I read a whole biography about him, and it was very interesting. He wrote this: "Our fathers held out to them the hand of friendship. The strangers then asked, the strangers being the English, then asked for a small piece of land on which they might pitch their tents. The request was cheerfully granted. By and by, they begged for more, and more was given them. And in this way, they had continued to ask, or have obtained by force or fraud, the fairest portions of our territory." And that's this area where we are in, southern Ontario, and he was speaking about, because the Mississaugas were all over southern Ontario. After many, many forced surrenders, the Mississaugas' last remaining plot of land, small plot of land, north of Lake Ontario, was their village along the Credit River, which is not very far from here. And they lost control of that too. And although Peter Jones and his people tried to work it out with the Crown so that they and other people, Ojibwe people, could move into the Owen Sound area, the Crown didn't support that. Instead, the Mississaugas, who were here, ended up moving south to what is now the Mississaugas of the New Credit Reserve. That's near Hagersville. How did they end up there? They moved there not because the Crown found them a place, but because the Six Nations learned of what was happening to them, learned that they had nowhere to go, and they returned the kindness that the Mississaugas had shown to them when they had come north from what is now the United States and gotten land from the Mississaugas. And then the Mohawks said, "We're going to give you some of our land. We're going to give you some of our reserve." So they made it possible for the Mississaugas to stay in southern Ontario. The settlers didn't show any such generosity towards the Mississaugas, as they were hungry to own what is this prime land. So it's true then to say that the Mississaugas territory in southern Ontario, including the very land this church is on, was stolen. That is an uncomfortable truth, but it's an uncomfortable truth we have to acknowledge. What do we do with that fact? I'm not going to be burdened by guilt by this. It's a fact, and we have to do something about it. So I have a few thoughts that I want to share. So we can support the Mississaugas of the New Credit as they work towards land claim settlements. There was one that was just reached this past March for the Rouge Valley claim. Talk up in support of that. It's important. Learn about and recognize that the Mississauga story is just one of the many stories of stolen land in this country. And we have to stand with Indigenous peoples as they try to get land back. Another thing that some of us have done, which is great and very positive, is to visit the Mississaugas of the New Credit Reserve, which they have every summer in August. And it's a wonderful powwow that you can attend, and it's truly a celebration. It's a celebration of the fact that they and other Indigenous peoples still maintain their culture and their relationships with and respect for the lands and waters. And then finally, I want to share a dream that we've been talking about in the Kinship Circle. It's that we, as Roncesvalles United Church, can make this space available and welcoming to the Mississaugas of the Credit, to other Indigenous peoples, and others who are coming and who live in and visit this city. We want this to be a place where they can remember and celebrate their histories, share with each other and with us, and so that we can become kin with each other. And as part of that developing kinship, we're really, really happy to have Patti Krawec come and join us today. Thanks.
I'm Shauna Coral. Instead of prayer, today I wrote a poem. This poem is for our beloved Earth, what we know deep in our souls, our connection to her, and what we have lost, and the path that we're walking under this walls of welcome, as well as the eighth fire. And I'd like for us all to take a moment to be silent and to breathe into that remembering of what we lost, what we all lost, and what we have to gain as we walk together. Let's have a moment of silence. This is called My Beloved. I am my beloved, and my beloved is me. She is my whispering mother of earth, wind, water, and fire. My beloved is a turtle gift from the sea, a feather song soaring. Her body and skin is the earth, the mossy ground, rich ferns, the rising mountains and flat plains, the splendid forested trees. The grass is her waving hair, and the flowers are her jewels of beauty. The wind and air is her diamond breath, life inhaling and exhaling in the breeze. Her water, oceans and streams, is in her magnificent things, a river birth of creation, moving and flowing, a cascading waterfall. Fire is her eagle spirit, an eternal circle flame glowing. An unspoken blessing given by my beloved mother. Listen to her ancient whispering voice, a deep knowing of what is most precious. Give thanks to her sacred garden, a sealed relationship of reciprocity. Now bless the waters in the land, the earth and all her creatures, every plant and flower opening, every pebble and stone, every grain of sand. Bless the wind and air above. Bless the sacred fires within each of us. Open our hearts more fully. Listen and see more clearly. Bless Mother Earth. One breath, one voice, one song, one heartbeat is my beloved. I am my beloved. We are our beloved. What is done to one is done to all. My beloved is me, and our beloved is us, a kinship song. Blessed be.
Thank you, Shauna, for that beautiful poem.
Patti, maybe you should make your way to your seat here. Are you happy to do that? You can hear me now, though, right? was a song that Patti specifically requested us to sing. So we've been practicing it. I'd like you to sing along with it. If you're not familiar with this song, Testify to Love. Yeah, it's on the yellow sheets. And it's on one side or other of the yellow sheets called Testify to Love. Anyone familiar with that song? By Winona Judd? So you're not familiar with it, and I wasn't either. So I'm going to say we're trying to sing this together, or rather, to say it like a prayer. So you don't even have to sing it, you don't have to know the tune. So if I can demonstrate with the first line. All the colours of the rainbow. Do you see how musical that sounds? So anybody here can just say the words. So we just practice that first line. All the colours of the rainbow. Isn't that awesome? So we will try and sing the tune, and you can also sing along. If you get lost, just remember to say the last word of every line, at least, like they do in the rap songs. Some people don't have sheets at the back. So if you could share at the front, you could pass some back. Has everyone got something to look at? There's some more chairs over here if you want to come. And there's 3 over here. Pilar. Can you hear the guitar at the back? Good. Okay, shall we try this? All the colors of the rainbow, all the voices of the wind, every dream that reaches out to find where love begins. Every word of every story, every star in every sky, every corner of creation needs to testify. With every breath we take, we testify to love. Witness in the silences when words are not enough. In the ancient wisdom, dreaming of enough. For 7 generations, we testify to love. From the mountains to the valleys, from the rivers to the seas, every hand that reaches out, every hand that reaches out to offer peace, every simple act of mercy, every heartbeat of the drum. Any more drum? Every hope in every heart, we speak what love has done. We testify to truth, generosity and love, in the all-embracing earth, in the meaning of enough, in the ancient wisdom, in the meaning of enough. For 7 generations, we testify to love. the last chorus. We testify to love, generously and love, in the all-embracing earth, under the sky above, and in the ancient wisdom, in the meaning of enough. For 7 generations, we testify to love.
Good morning, everyone. So, the United Church has apologized to Indigenous people for the harms it did in the past, and it's worked to create an inclusive space. But it's really up to us to take this further, and we hope that today will spur us on to action. Patti Krawec is Anishinaabe and Ukrainian from Lake Seoul First Nation, and she now lives in the Niagara region. We came to know her as the author of Becoming Kin, which challenged us to think about the stories and the people who were left out of history that we were taught. She's a witness to the silences. Our ancestors came to take over this land and displace the people that lived there. But we have a choice to create a different relationship, a kinship, as Nancy talked about, and as the book, Patti's book, talks about. Patti's blog, 1,000 Worlds, tells of traditional stories and encourages us to think about what they teach us about how to live in good relationship with the earth and all who share it. Every word of every story, every star in every sky, every corner of creation. Patti also co-hosts Medicine for Resistance, a podcast that shares Indigenous and Black experiences in lively and insightful conversations. You can witness their resilience if you listen to this podcast. She is a very busy woman, this Patti Krawec, and she answers emails.
Yes.
We're all called to do this work of reconciliation, to become kin, and to testify to love. We look forward to hearing or to reading Patti's next book that's coming out soon, The Bad Indians Book Club. And her book, Becoming Kin, will be available after the talk today. Please join me now in welcoming Patti Krawec.
Thank you. Good morning. Anin bojo wapna na ngongko Indigenous Kaz adik ndorom obeshko king Ndujwa Niagara Ndujwa Ojibwe Anishinaabe Kweyanda. I love that song, Testify to Love. I encountered it for the first time at a conference in Austin, Texas called Nevertheless She Preached, which is an interfaith conference celebrating women and queer and trans people in ministry leadership. It started off as a Christian conference and has now moved into an interfaith space. And when I heard this song led and sung by a largely queer and trans audience, it just felt like a queer anthem to me, and so I keep asking people to sing it. The first time I asked the church to sing it, I had been asked to talk on October 8th, a couple of years ago. It was the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and they wanted me to come in to talk about land, and so the text that I chose was from Leviticus, the land, if you act right or the land will vomit you out. It seemed like a good message to bring some Mennonites. But then October 7th happened, right? So, well, first off, I realized that one of the big clubber verses was just a few verses earlier. And I didn't want the congregation to think that I agreed with that celebrating queer and trans life was part of what would cause the land to vomit people out. So I planned to address that, and I mentioned this to the pastor, and he said to me, you promised you weren't going to say anything about that. And I was like, wow, that really doesn't sound like something I will promise. But I must have said something. And I was pretty new to public speaking, so I didn't think I had a choice. So I agreed. And it felt terrible. But then October 7th happened, and I was supposed to speak on October 8th. And I figured, well, if they didn't want to hear about queer people, they definitely don't want to hear about Palestine. And so I didn't. I managed to talk about the land without mentioning either of these things. Now, to anybody unfortunate enough to greet me in the lobby, they heard about both of those things. And I had them sing this song because I loved it so much. And in my remarks, I quoted those lines about from the river to the sea. And then I paused and I said it again as a code, right? People, because sometimes we do that, sometimes we speak in code. And I learned that people heard my code. When I've talked about this with members of the church, they say, yeah, they knew what I was saying. They knew what I was talking about. But speaking in code is not good enough. And I have never done that since. When people have asked me to be silent on Palestine since then, because of the organization, because it's a government or because it's whatever, I will wear my ribbon skirt that looks like a Palestinian flag. I will hang it behind me if it's a Zoom call. And inevitably, people will mention to me that they felt seen and heard, because Palestinians live among us. Their friends live among us. And they need to be heard. They're part of our congregations, they're part of our schools, they're part of our communities. So anyway, so I don't tell that story often, but it's just an encouragement. Don't be silent in whatever platform you have. I don't know if this costs me gigs. It might. I have no idea, because they're obviously not emailing me to say, I would have invited you to come and talk, but you won't shut up about Palestine, so we're not calling you. So I don't know whether or not it's costing me anything. I've also told my agent that I won't talk to cops, so that could also be costing me something. I have no idea. I will talk to social workers, though, because I feel like social workers have a good heart. We often find ourselves assessing somebody else's Christianity. We don't mean to, or maybe we do. Because when somebody like Donald Trump or the truckers' convoy of a few years ago comes along holding a Bible and claiming to be saved, it's a reasonable response. We have an idea in our heads of what a real Christian looks like, and you're probably reviewing that right now. The criteria that make sense to you, and many people seeking power, don't meet any of those criteria. But it's the wrong question. Asking if a person is really Christian or if they're just using Christianity to achieve power are unhelpful questions, because one, of course they are using it to achieve power. That's like not even a controversial statement. But when we ask that question, we're drawing lines, we're creating boundaries between, us and not us. And we're avoiding the real question, which is, why does it always work? Because it always works. There are wonderful congregations like this scattered throughout Canada and the US, but it still works. You can claim Christian belief and use it to stomp out the lives of the most marginalized people, and it always works. So why does it always work? That's a better question. It gets us at the kind of change we need to see, and it forces some introspection. Because then it's not enough for us to just point to our own good theology and our own good works, because clearly our good theology and our good works did not stop those people from achieving power by using Christianity. It works because no matter how much we learn, we keep building towers. And we keep building towers because colonialism has gotten inside our heads. So I'm going to begin with a reading from Becoming Kin. That was what the original ask was for. And then I'm going to turn to a reflection on the Tower of Babel. I love that little tiny story of the Tower of Babel. Because to me, the Tower of Babel is a story of people returning to themselves and the scattering that takes place when we do. My blog investigates Ojibwe stories. They were documented in 1906. I went to my friend Mea. Somebody had asked me about Jobayabos, if I had any teachings about him, because Jobayabos is kind of our leader of the underworld, or the next life, or whatever you want to call it. And so I went to my friend Maya, who was like the only person who I thought could possibly know the answer to this question. And she says, Patti, for the third time, here is this archive of Ojibwe stories. And she sent me a Dropbox link, and she says, for the third time, here is the link. The answers to your questions are in this archive. And so this time I thought, you know what, fine. I'm going to go through this archive story by story. And that's how Thousand Worlds, that's what Thousand Worlds has become. It's an invitation to investigate 1,000 worlds. It comes from the Zapatista concept of a world in which many worlds can coexist, which is not a world of towers, right? Tower is the place where we all become conformed. So Biskabian, returning to ourselves. Colonization has gotten inside our heads. It's more than driving cars and talking on iPhones, more than the food we eat or where we shop. It's how we think. We often put colonialism in the past, dressing it up in 16th century costumes. But as Patrick Wolf has said, colonialism is a process and not an event. Settler colonialism came to stay in the Americas in the 16th century, but it didn't start there, nor has it stopped. It cut its teeth on the Crusades, where the rape and violence enacted on Jews and Muslims were the price of Christian freedom. A violence that persists and finds expression in the burnings of mosques and synagogues, shootings and travel bans. It sharpened its blade on the repeated expulsions of Jewish people from Europe and the reconquest of the Iberian Peninsula, which banished Muslims from Spain. It consolidated its power over women through the fires of the witch burnings, and it arrived on these shores with the authority of the doctrine of discovery tucked beneath its arm, settling into our lands and our heads, shaping everything about how we live. It is an ongoing process of destruction and replacement, destroying indigenous beliefs and lifeways and replacing them with churches and board meetings. Wendy McCoon's Genius and Leanne Betta-Samosak Simpson both write about Biskabiang as returning to our own Anishinaabe way of thinking. When we return to ourselves, we undo the colonialism that has gotten inside our heads. But we can only do this if we are willing to understand our history differently, if we take our stories, yours and mine, out of isolation about how we got here and see them as something different, something that allows us to become relatives again, to put together what modern ideas about race and about what race have torn apart. Ultimately, what we inherit are relationships and our beliefs about them, writes Aurora Levins Morales. We can't alter the actions of our ancestors, but we can decide what to do with the social relations that they have left us. In order to understand these relationships, we need to listen to the histories we were told, not so that we can remember the things, listen to the histories we were not told. Means something very different, doesn't it? So that we can begin to remember the things buried beneath the histories that we were told. Unforgetting. It's the second most common question I get when I give talks about becoming kin. The most common question, of course, being some variant of, if we give back the land, what happens to my house? People want to know what unforgetting means, and to be honest with you, I mostly liked the way the words sound. It felt like a conscious decision to excavate something, much different from just remembering. Remembering can be fun or uncomfortable depending on what you're remembering, but unforgetting feels different. It feels intentional in a very particular way. It comes from Greek philosophy, and in this concept, the opposite of truth is not the lie. The opposite of truth is forgetting. So if we're going to find the truth, we have to unforget. We have to look at the stories we're being told, stories that contain and control us by containing and controlling our history, and reach past those stories to the truth. The truths that are part of our lives, but which we have covered up in various ways, like those statues and monuments that get erected to tell a particular history, valorizing soldiers or memorializing conflicts, without asking us to consider the loss of Black and Indigenous life that those victories cost us. I am Ojibwe Anishinaabe through my father. And my maternal family were German-Ukrainian migrants who came here in 1951 as refugees. Like most of us, I write and speak from many places. Primarily, I think about the generosity of my father's ancestors in sharing the land, and the subsequent exploitation of that generosity by those who colonized it, as we just heard in the land acknowledgement, which was lovely, by the way. Thank you for that. I think about the responsibility of newcomers like my mother's family, to be a good and responsible presence here, to enter the land well and form relationships. And I think about how I can live out those entwined legacies in a way that builds rather than destroys. So with that in mind, we're going to turn to the ancient and yet somehow prescient story of the Tower of Babel and what it may teach us about the things we build and returning to ourselves. In tarot, the tower is a symbol for ambition that is constructed on faulty premises. The foundation is rotten, and although the building may last 158 years, it cannot stand indefinitely. Cracks will show, and you can patch it up with tar sands and pipelines and decrepit monarchies, but it cannot hold. The tower will inevitably collapse. The change this card draws our attention to is not the kind of change that we choose or work towards. It is the change that comes upon us, unawares perhaps, but only because we haven't been paying attention. We need to think about this in the context of decolonizing our faith, because decolonizing is not a metaphor for anti-racism or affirming queer and trans life. Colonization happens when people from one place move to another, taking their priorities and beliefs with them, and then insisting that everyone already in that place conform to these things. Which is why it is so important that we think about the places we speak and listen from. Our words inevitably track bits and pieces of ourselves onto the page, and the tacitography of reading means that you interpret these track bits according to your own rituals and experiences. This isn't wrong. Knowing who we are helps us to think together rather than just imposing ideas the way that colonialism has taught us to do. In his foreword, Omar El-Akkad, we talked with him on the podcast, which gave me permission to contact him about writing a foreword. In his foreword to Bad Indians Book Club, he commented that we saw some of the same stories, some of the same books that I talk about very differently. You know, there was some disagreement in how we interpret it, and I'm dead curious which ones we saw differently. But I'm also afraid to ask because he's like way smarter than me. But he found those areas of difference the most enjoyable, coming up on a different perspective. So I really appreciated that. Decolonization, therefore, is an unsettling and at times violent process that not only replaces the colonizers with the colonized in places of authority, but profoundly changes the priorities and beliefs of the community. I don't think you need to be a visionary to see that the tower is crumbling and changes upon us whether we like it or not. So as we replace one center with another, we must think carefully about the towers that we're building and whose land we're building them on. Because unless we wrestle with the reality of stolen land and stolen lives, we risk building a tower that is kinder and more inclusive, but resting on the same rotten foundation as before. And I want us to think carefully about the way we talk about nonviolence, because Fanon is right. Decolonization is at times a violent process, just as colonization was and remains. It's very easy to preach nonviolence when the police are protecting the gains that you have made or the property you have acquired. That is not nonviolence, that's just outsourced. On this first day of Pride Month, we should celebrate joy and love and belonging and all of the things that have been won. But Stonewall was a riot. It began with police violence, and Queens responded with bricks. Besides, even when we gather peacefully at Standing Rock or Wet'suwet'en or on a rail blockade in Vancouver protesting our government's complicity with the genocide in Palestine, our existence becomes an affront to the state, and they come at us with violence anyway. So having grounded ourselves in this place, and in my own set of relations and politics, we turn to the story found in Genesis, a handful of verses about a time in the generations after Noah and the flood. Ayo. So the world was vibing with one lingo and all the same chat. Then Peeps rolled east and found this chill spot in Shinar to settle. They were like, bet, let's whip up some bricks and bake them right. They went for bricks instead of rocks and used tar to stick them. Then they said, yo, let's build a city and a tower that goes all the way to the clouds so we can get mad clout. Otherwise, we're gonna be scattered and stuff. But the big guy up top peeped the city and the tower they were flexing. God, not about that life. He basically said, y'all doing too much, time to switch it up. So he remixed their language. making them speak all different things so they couldn't understand one another anymore. Chaos, confusion, big elephant squad. Big guy sent them flying all over the earth and they dipped on building the city. That's why it got the name Babel, because there the big dude turned their chat into a mess. Genesis 11, 1-9, Gen Alpha translation of the NIV. Which brings me to my first question. Why did they have common speech? We don't even have common speech between generations, let alone entire peoples. And we're quite a few generations out from Noah by the time this story takes place. Language evolves, and as you can see from the Gen Alpha translation, it evolves fast, especially when you're appropriating African American vernacular English in order to sound cool. Much of our slang comes from Ave because we like black things more than we like black people. The writer of this text probably found his own grandchildren incomprehensible at times, and he makes a point in chapter 10 of telling us about all the different languages. First, there's a genealogy, then a long list of everybody who descended from Noah, and then he tells us that the maritime peoples who descended from Javan had their own languages, that the sons of Ham did as well, one of whom was Cush, the ancestor of Nimrod, who is generally associated with this tower, although accounts vary as to whether or not he actually built it. And I don't think this is a just so story about why we all speak different languages. I've read the Bible a few times. It doesn't tell just so stories like, this is how the chipmunk got its stripes, or this is why the elephant's trunk is so long. To be sure, I don't think the Ojibwe tell just so stories either. The story about why the chipmunk got its stripes is about us. It's not just about chipmunk. Another thing to remember is that these stories were written when this company, these peeps who rolled east from Shinar, when the people who wrote the story had just returned from exile in Babylon. To be sure, these are old stories, handed down generation by generation, but they were not written down until the people sat down by the river and mourned their home, much like the traditional stories of the people indigenous to the so-called Americas were not written down until boarding schools and relocations meant they were in danger of being forgotten. That's when people with oral traditions write things down, preserve them before there aren't any elders left to recite them. As an author, I can assure you, writing requires us to make choices about what we emphasize and what to set aside, which makes this small story very important. They chose to include it. So why did these people, trying to figure out what went wrong, what sent them into exile, write this particular story now that they've come home and tried to make Israel great again? The greatness was incomplete, of course. They and their children spoke the language of their captors. The story was written by people whose parents and grandparents had been marched into exile by an empire who insisted that everyone speak the same language and live the same way. The story about Babel changes when you think about it being written by the captives of such an empire, written by captives who lived beneath Mesopotamian towers and perhaps helped to build them. The story echoes through the captivity in Egypt and the destruction of the walls and towers in the Promised Land. Vibing with one lingo and all the same chat. Rabbis will tell you to pay attention when the text says the same thing twice, because it's there for a reason. So let's pay attention. Gen Alpha is coming of age watching video game streamers on platforms like Twitch, and the chat is the place where they talk with their friends about what they're watching. Chat is the place where you speak. Remember how important it is to think about that place as a speaker and as a listener. Remember the way that place shapes how we understand things. All one lingo, all the same chat. One language, one place. Thank you, Gen Alpha, for your clarity. Think about Indian boarding schools. Rules about using English on plantations. Think about all the ways that governments and their agents draw lines around place and then insist on an official language for that place. And then think about the violence they use to make that happen. Think about Christian nationalism and Zionism insisting that a chosen people and a holy land means a common language and a singular belief to which all must be conformed, instead of understanding that we are all chosen for a purpose and that all land is sacred. Second question. How did the leader convince everyone who was just vibing by the river to build a big tower for clout? This tower, the ziggurat, was a temple, And a ziggurat took a very long time to build, about 10 to 30 years, almost a whole generation, or at least that's what Google says. The pyramids at Giza probably took 20 to 30 years. Notre Dame in Paris took 185, not including the most recent renovation. It was largely completed in 90 years, but anyone who has lived through a renovation knows that the distance between largely completed and actually done can be very great. Although my renovation did not last an extra 90 years past clear, almost done. My point is that these kind of builds take a very long time and a lot of resources that could be used for something else. That takes authority and control. People don't just do that kind of work over a period of decades when there's other things going on like farming and home repairs and pottery making, unless somebody else has the ability to make them want to do it. Slogans like "Make Shinar Great Again" and "We're going to be lit" only go so far. Projects like this take a lot of workers, people who have to be made willing to move from their rural homes to cities, induced to give up a more nomadic lifestyle for one that is sedentary. And how do you get people to trade in vibing by the river for a life of credit scores and mortgages? We don't have to imagine too hard. European and American history is replete with enclosures and policies that bankrupt farmers, creating a class of landless and masterless men to work in an urban workforce. Vagrancy laws like the upcoming Bill 6 criminalize homelessness. Agriculture is a specialized skill, and when security tightened up at the US-Mexican border during his first administration, a lot of agribusiness in the Southwest lost their migrant labor workforce. Start rounding up the people you think might be undocumented, and now you've got your cheap prison labor conveniently skilled in the tasks that you need. The story of Babel also suggests a period of peace, because you can't build something that takes an entire generation while also fighting a war over territory. A building like this is an assertion of power over those who live in or near a place. Monuments and statues are a reminder of who is in charge. And when this group of people rolled east and decided to settle in Shinar, things got settled in a variety of ways, if you get my drift. Which brings me to my third question, and what this story has to teach us about the things that we build and how we might return to ourselves. Why did this make God so mad? There was no way these people were actually going to reach heaven, right? Like, we all watched Bezos and Katy Perry and that, like, launch. Like, that's a long way up there. And heaven is, like, way past that anyway. Like, or maybe it's, like, part of the multiverse, I have no idea. So, there was no threat to God from this tower, right? It's not like he thought that they were really going to build a tower and, like, storm heaven's gates with it. Right? Like, that's silly. So why did that make him so mad then? Like, if he was not under any kind of personal threat, which is the way the story is kind of told, why, like, what was there about this that made him so mad? Well, towers are exploitive, authoritarian spaces built on rotten foundations. We can see that easily. Towers require boundaries and a false peace that is just a cracking down of dissent, like we've seen it about university encampments, bylaws restricting access to where people can protest. But this cracking down can come from progressive people too. Can't we all just get along? Don't we all bleed red? I don't see color. Towers are also disabling spaces that don't make room for everyone. I am mindful, although in this space that's not true, but in many of our spaces, somebody in a wheelchair could not easily access our stages. We joke that our loud voices don't really need microphones, but the hearing impaired need those microphones. And they rarely have signing or closed captioning available to them, and we don't really wear masks anymore, even though we know that people with compromised immune systems are put at risk by these choices. Towers are impoverishing spaces. They consume resources and create debt. Debt is how countries create money, by the way. When you borrow $100,000, which who's going to buy a house for $100,000? It was just an easy number. You borrow money to buy a house, or you rack up consumer credit, or take out student loans, and the bank just literally makes up numbers. It's not like borrowing $20 for your friend. The bank doesn't have $500,000 sitting in its vault somewhere to give you to buy a house. They just make up a number. You turn it into money by paying it back. So that's how Canada, the US, Western countries, that's how they create money, is they create debt. which is why you could eliminate all student loans, and it doesn't really cost anybody anything because those numbers are just made up. Let's build ourselves a city with a tower, the ancient one said. A monument so everyone would know who we are, and so we won't be scattered. Building a thing, a nation, a church, so we won't be scattered. Building a theology, a movement, a circle of care in a world that doesn't. Because we can point to Nimrod, who may or may not have built the tower, but is crowded with it. We can point at the Tucker Convoy and Jeff Bezos and Doug Ford and everyone else. We can and we should. But they did not. Oh, where'd I go? Good thing I wasn't at like a really rhythmic part. Is that back on? Okay. Sorry.
Let's try this one instead. If you speak a little slow.
Hello. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So we can and we should. But Bezos, Ford, and everyone else did not build alone. And people may know that they will never be royals, but they may be safe in the white supremacist Christian nationalist world that is being created. And they will never feel the violence that lands on those who are not the same. You know that poem, first they came for this group, and I didn't speak up, and then I came for that group? Well, you know what? That's a terrible poem. It's a transactional kind of allyship. Because there are a lot of people, mostly white straight men, that this system will never come for you. Right? It will never come for you. But you have an obligation to act in solidarity anyway. Not because the system might one day come for you, but because the system should never come for any of us. So we need to find a better poem. So people will protect their innocence by denying the harms. Like people deny the harms of residential school. Well, we gave you school, we civilized you, all of that stuff. So they will protect their innocence by denying harms or reframing them as help or safety. How much damage has been done under the name of help or safety? And that, I believe, is what made God so mad. The authoritarian control that towers need, the exclusion and creation of marginalized people, the exploitation of their resources, the violence of imposed sameness, same language, same beliefs, same goals, same everything. This would echo later in 1 Samuel 8, when the people of Israel say that they want a king to lead them, and Samuel warns them about everything the king will do and take, and they don't care. We do this in movements too. What is the common language we expect people to share? What language and stories are we appropriating in order to create a common language, perhaps a kinder and more inclusive, but it's still a kind of appropriation and colonization? Returning to ourselves means returning to our own stories, our own languages, for what they might teach us, which is why when I speak in church, I don't come talking about Nana Bourgeot. I come talking about your stories, about Christian stories, because I want you to learn how to look at them differently. I want you to learn how to see them in a different perspective. We reach back into our own histories and pick up the things that are ours. What are we asking them to give up for this thing we're building? This common language that we're creating? Whose clout are we building? We may not be exploiting or ignoring the trauma of others to gain influence and power, but what are we doing about those who do? Why did their claims of Christianity keep working, even though so many of us know better? The story of Babel is a story of movement, told within a people of movement that has lessons for us who build movements, lessons for those of us who want to build things so that we won't be scattered. But what if we've missed the point? What if our power to change the world lies in being scattered rather than in building things so we won't be? If Christians are going to decolonize their faith, they should be looking to Judaism to inform and shape their Christian faith rather than the center of empire. The church is not the heir of Judaism. It is a synthesis of Judaism, Rome, and pagan beliefs, but it forgets that. It appropriates Jewish thought to give legitimacy to their hybrid beliefs, but it doesn't listen to Judaism, kind of like the way slang appropriates Ave, but doesn't listen to African Americans and Canadians. The church has created a genealogy that goes straight to Noah and Adam, but forgets about Romulus and Remus and all the other places it has picked up truth from. And maybe that's why the European Christians who entered this place never thought to look for the kingdom of God here. They thought they had to impose it, impose a single language on all of us, a single way of thinking so they could build their shining city on a hill, a beacon for freedom that they will impose on the world but not welcome people into. Vibing with one lingo, all the same chat. And yet the things that Christianity has built, the tower of settler colonialism and the nation building that descended from it, is antithetical to its earliest teachings. It's antithetical to the Judaism it claims as a parent. It is not antithetical to Rome, the parent it refuses to acknowledge. And so it builds a tower on top of the sins it won't admit, a tower with a rotten, unstable base. What if the destruction of the tower was a rebellion? A returning to ourselves of all the different people who had been pulled together to build that thing? What if it was a refusal to speak the common language, to build a vanity project, to be exploited labor? What if God destroyed the tower through the organized rebellion of the people? And what if their scattering was a return to self rather than a punishment? I mean, it's only a punishment to the people who invested in the tower, right? The venture capitalists. Not to those who were exploited for it. For a while I was listening to this podcast. It's called The Tides of History now, but it used to be called The Fall of Rome because Patrick Wyman's research specialty is on the fall of Rome. And so I was listening to this podcast because, like, who isn't obsessed with the fall of Rome, right? We're all obsessed with it. This is a safe place, we can admit that. So I'm listening to this podcast, which is really, really interesting. And then I was driving down the highway and all of a sudden the penny dropped. I was like, wait, Rome fell. Rome fell. And I just repeated that phrase to myself over and over again. Rome fell. It was like this epiphany. The towers fall. Rome fell. Rome didn't last forever. The aftershocks of it certainly have. You know, the Confederacy in the U.S. fell. The residential schools closed. But the problem, of course, with these things falling, with the way these towers have fallen, is that nobody analyzed the foundation. Even the TRC and the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls were not, because of the rules that were put around them, were not able to analyze the foundation. And so we just keep building new towers, new inclusive, kinder towers on the same unstable base because we talk about racism as if it's a personal failing and not a structural thing. We talk about racism as if it's rude instead of the basis of Canada and the United States. Ruth Wilson Gilmore gives us a brilliant definition of racism. It is the state-sponsored or extrajudicial exploitation of group-differentiated vulnerability to premature death. And if you Google Ruth Wilson Gilmore racism, you'll find it, because I'm mangling the quote here. But it's about group differentiated, so it's state-sponsored and it's extrajudicial, which means the state does it, and also the state gives permission for other people to do it. And it results in group-differentiated vulnerability to premature death. And I love that definition because it applies broadly to all kinds of things, to all kinds of outgroups. It applies to queer and trans people. It is group-differentiated vulnerability to premature death. That's what's at stake. That's what the state legislates. That's why we're all in prison, because we know that that decreases your lifespan. That's why we're all homeless, because it decreases our lifespan. That's why they talk about fiscally responsible governance and then don't fund the things we know that are cheaper, right? Housing people is cheaper. It saves on healthcare. Providing good healthcare is cheaper. It saves on emergency visits. But they don't do the thing that's cheaper, do they? No, because all that money, they're too busy reinforcing their tower. They could have more money for their tower, but they don't need more money. What they need is to keep us out of their tower. So what if God destroyed the power through the organized rebellion of the people? And what if the scattering was a return to self? The people didn't need to take the tower down on their own because the base was rotten and the structure could not stand. And so when that became apparent, they took their moment and refused to build any further. They refused to continue crushing the image of God on earth. They insisted on being their authentic selves. They refused the performative decolonization of a seat at the table of tower design, and they left. What if there is power in our scattering, in the relationships between us that form as a result of that scattering, in the layered relationships that form as our communities exist in layers instead of borders? The rainbow does not have clearly delineated lines with pure colors, but red merges into orange, merges into yellow, and so on. Light scatters. What if we built a movement of coalitions instead of allyship? I was at a conference in Chicago last year where a rabbi from a synagogue in Chicago talked about that. Talked about building coalitions where we educate our own communities and then we come together as coalitions. Instead of coming together, I'm going to be an ally. No, I'm going to educate my community. And then when something needs to be happening, we'll put our communities together as coalitions. I really like that, because allyship can so easily devolve into white savior tower building. Each of us responsible to organize and educate our own communities. What if we built coalitions instead of towers? The people at Babel scattered. Jewish people scattered. The church scattered. The Anishinaabe people have our own story of scattering, of leaving the East Coast and migrating westward to get ahead of the light-skinned people from across the sea. And along our migration west, people stopped and formed communities while others continued on until we collectively stopped in the lands around Lake Superior. Sure, there was conflict. Gonna move into a space, there's gonna be some agitation. But we figured it out. We figured out how to live together in layered relationship with the Haudenosaunee and the Cree, with the Lakota and the Blackfeet. We did not build monuments or cities. Some Indigenous people did, the Ojibwe did not. We did not create borders and walls to contain and control. The strength of the people lies in the relationships that they forge, in the relationships that they live in. That is what God declared to be good. The connections between us that result from scattering and living in layered relations. Learning to get along with difference rather than opposing sameness. Sharing space instead of building towers with moats and doors that need defending. I love this artwork, by the way. And one of the things that I really love about it is that our stories and your stories are connected, but not, one doesn't take over the other. It shows the connections between us. But we stay ourselves, and you stay yourselves. We return to ourselves. We return to our own stories, and our own lineages, and our own families. And we pick up the truths that have been handed down to us. And we got to sift out a lot of the terrible things that happened on one side of the family or the other. My grandmother fled Stalin and found safety under Hitler. Stalin destroyed her family. They were factory owners when the Russian Revolution took place, and so they were not very welcome by the new administration. And so in her late teens, early 20s, she fled Ukraine and by this time it was the war. And she was able to move because during wars, borders are kind of porous. And so she fled to Germany and she found safety there. She got a home, she got a job, she got taken care of. And I think about that a lot. I think about finding safety in the way that the things that we will accept, particularly right now as Christian nationalism is on the rise, and the things that we will accept in order to be safe, the harms that we will turn away from. Because we're also watching how history gets buried, aren't we? How books get banned and new curriculums get written, and the rights that are hard won are rolled back. We're watching the tower rebuild itself. We don't need a kinder and more inclusive settler colonialism. We don't need a bigger tower built on the same rotten, unstable base. We need a decolonized faith that refuses empires, refuses their towers, and returns to itself. We are all scattered. Few of us live on the lands that knew our ancestors, but the land knows us. The waters connect us. And we can think about the places and people that we bring into this space, into our movements and into the things that we build. We can think about the towers we construct to feel safe and how they will inevitably disable, impoverish, impose, and exploit. We can build genealogies that give us exclusive rights to a place or a belief, or we can remember the words of Mojave Akamal O'odham poet Natalie Diaz. They write, "It's not about blood, and it never has been. It's about how you arrive and build relationship with the land that you're on. And once you're there, it's about how you receive others." Miigwech.
Wow. That was amazing, wasn't it? It's really interesting. We were planning to sing a song that Anne Hines, who's the minister here, who's becoming known as a dream catcher, she caught a dream that Philip Cote had to paint this mural in a church, something he had a dream of since he was a child. And when he painted it, Anne said, "Can you write a song that shows the relationship between the stained glass windows he chose to paint around and the mural?" So I came and sat in here, and this is the song on the other side. It's called The Song of the Eighth Fire. And the Eighth Fire, the crucial thing for me, I'm kind of a new Canadian, so in some ways this is all new, but it's somehow, the key is, in the Eighth Fire prophecy, it says we have a second chance to get it right, to get our relationship right. And after listening to Patti, I really hope we do. And I think in some ways this event is the presence of the Eighth Fire. So as a settler, a new settler to this country, I wrote this song. It's a kind of a prayer. It begins with an expression of profound grief, which if you share it with me, then say it along with me like we did before. So the first line is, "I never stopped to count the cost." Can you just say that? I never stopped to count the cost. All right. I never knew what I had lost.
I never knew what I had lost.
So it's a bit of a call and response song in some ways. So you could sing the second part of each line. Does that make sense? But you can sing any time you want on this. I never stopped to count the cost. I never knew what I had lost. In my blind belief and greed, in my selfish greed, never stopped to count the cost. Never saw the lines I crossed. Oh, never knew what I had lost. And this is from the stained glass windows. Blessed are those that mourn. They know what's true in what they could have done and what they can't undo. In the burning of their shame blood of all their feeling. In the depth of their pure sorrow, they find healing. Oh, oh, oh. Blessed are the poor in spirit. They know the source of all true power lies not in the force of arms or in the overreaching tower. Undefined by deeds and titles, possessions, stocks and shares, in the unclaimed lands, heaven is theirs. Oh. Blessed are the meek, they know the truth of love, in the acceptance of what's given, and in the meaning of enough. They know the turning of the seasons, life and death and birth. They seek for no dominion, only communion with the earth. This is the story of creation. This is the prophecy. In humility and healing, in the gift of poverty. And I long to walk together in conviviality. And for all our children's children, become the world we yearn to see. And I long to dive together once again in search of long lost earth. In the flood of global devastation, dare to be a brave new birth. This is the way, this is the truth. This is the life to live. This is a call to action, and I am all I have to give. It's all I have. And this is the big chorus at the end. This is the eighth fire burning. This is the second chance. I can hear the water drum, and I become the dance. This is the eighth fire burning. This is the second chance. We can hear the water drum, and we become the dance.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for coming for this special occasion, and thank Patti for sharing her time, her energy, and her wisdom, and laying down for us a challenge to go out and return to ourselves, find our own bundles, and pick them up so that we can join together once we have reviewed, looked at who we are as part of the world that we have. And I'd like to thank Patti for sharing that with us, and the beauty of her ideas. Yeah. And so that brings us to the end of our join here, but we have Coming Kin available over by the screen over there, and is holding up a copy. It's a wonderful book.
And I think the author will sign it.
I've read it twice, and it is wonderful. It has so many great stories, so many ways to take action and become part of a new way of being. So thank you so much.
The other setup.